Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answer should shine. The fact is fiction, conviction thinning. They're selling the lie. Immigration headlines collide and divide. Some want cooperation, some want a guide, but coverage picks only one piece of the tide. They're selling the lie. Reforming the courts while the workforce thins out. Promises shifting from whisper to shout, but the follow-through fades when the cameras turn south. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but clarity keeps wearing thin. The louder they speak, the less we can keep. Truth gets lost in the spin.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. I hope if you had a chance to watch it, you enjoyed our new countdown that was just created by a guy on X for me. But yeah, so this is the Muddy Waters Podcast. We exist to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state. Unfortunately, the mainstream media does not seem to be interested in telling the truth. In fact, they seem to be a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party, unfortunately. And they're actually directly paid by our governor in a lot of ways. So that's a little transparent at this point. But anyway, but either way, they're captured. And so we exist to kind of tell stories about what's actually going on, what they should be reporting on. We try to bring people in to talk about. And so we do that by bringing in people like our guest today, Matt Jacobson, who is, amongst other things, I would say an expert in the world of what's going on in the energy crisis we have going on here in the state of Maine. So thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah. I have fun. That's part of the reason I keep doing it. It's not for the money. When that comes, I'll let you know. But until then, it's mostly for the fun. But and I believe in the cause, obviously. But yeah. I enjoy conversation. So being able to have conversation and is good, especially around topics that I think matter. I've been wanting to have somebody on to talk about energy for a while. I've had a couple people that I've been courting, we'll say, in the past, and I did get Matt Harrington to come on and speak about it briefly. But yeah, I just think it's one of the big issues as we look at what's going on in our state. Where when you look at what I think has the potential to help conservatives win, and I actually wouldn't care who won as long as our state moves in a positive direction. But I think the only hope for that right now is the Republican Party, the conservatives, because the Democrats don't seem to care about affordability, for instance, unless that means the government paying for everything, which is not actually affordable. So affordability, I think, is one of the biggest things that's going to have the potential to impact this upcoming election for us. And so energy is a huge part of that. So I wanted to have you come on to talk about that, but also wanted to give you an opportunity to tell people who you are. If people listen to the Ray Richardson Show, they probably already know who you are, and obviously all the other places you've been around. But there are a lot of people that aren't as aware, and part of why they listen to my podcast is to kind of get up to speed a little bit more on what is going on here in our state. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to say who you are, where do you come from, what have you done in the political realm in the past, and then what are you doing, being willing to be out there regularly speaking about politics in such a politically charged atmosphere that we have here in 2025.
No, these are great questions. Thanks for asking them. So, I'm a Air Force brat. My father was a Naval Academy graduate and took his commission in the Air Force. Back when he did it, they didn't have an Air Force Academy, so they were taking guys from Navy to start the Air Force, West Point as well. And so my dad was one of those guys. So we moved a lot. I went to 3 high schools. I lived in a lot. I'm in my 26th house right now. So lots of moving. I went to the Naval Academy. I took my commission in the Air Force. I flew airplanes for a little bit. And then I got involved in the railroad industry and worked for a big railroad. And then I got an opportunity to run the St. Lawrence and Atlantic Railroad here in Maine, which is the one that runs by, Tukey's Bridge up to, at that time, a place called Island Palm, Vermont. And then we acquired the tracks into Montreal. So and connected with the Canadian National Railroad. I got noticed by them and they hired me, and I got to run international sales and marketing for CN for a while. And then moved back to Maine to run Maine and Company, which is a privately funded, not-for-profit that tries to attract businesses to Maine. And that's really where I got involved in, or really understood what was going on with public policy. And in that time, we lost a deal I thought we should have won. And it was just a public policy blunder, frankly, and it would concern me to the point that I had this epiphany that we were leaving Maine and frankly our country worse off than we found it, and it'd be the first generation in American history to do that. And I had kids small at the time, and it really compelled me to run. So in 2010, I ran for governor. I was one of the 6 dwarfs. Paul was not a dwarf, but I ran for governor and learned a ton. I had a fascinating time. I would encourage anyone to run, but yet I also have a lot of empathy for people that do it. It's not easy, raising money and being out there and having people take shots at you, and it hurts your family. It's a hard business. So anyway, I did and got beat like I stole something, and went back in my hole for a while. I worked for a startup data center for a while, and then I got an opportunity to be the first executive director of the Maine Lobster Marketing Collaborative, which was a newly created entity to market the Maine lobster industry. Never been done before. And so, as you can imagine, that was a pretty interesting gig. I did that for 5 years, got it reauthorized, and then an opportunity to run sales marketing for Summit Natural Gas here in Maine. And so that's how I ended up here. And over the last, when I first started at Summit about 7 years ago, natural gas was the bridge fuel, and we were, it was pretty innocuous, and nobody really thought too much about it. And then, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, something changed. And the public advocate of the state of Maine introduced a bill in the state legislature to ban natural gas. And that was the epiphany, really, for my company and for utilities in general. We had always thought that our battleground, our place of adjudication, was the Public Utilities Commission. They approved rate increases, they approved expansions. And so we kind of knew how that worked. And I didn't know much about the PUC. I've testified now there a couple of times. It is a court adversarial proceeding when you go there. So we were comfortable in that environment because that's how utilities do. And what that bill showed us, that the battleground was no longer just the PUC, but now it was the legislature and the public as well. So at that point, we decided that maybe it was time to tell our story a little bit more. And so I called Ray, whom I'd known for 25 years, I first went on his show when I was at Maine and Company. So we're talking, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And so Ray said, sure, come on, let's talk energy. And so I've been doing it every Tuesday now for about 3 years. And we've been able to beat some really bad bills back, and really, as Ray's show, as a platform to kind of explain what the harm would be. And it really made some difference. So my whole mission there is to just try to educate folks. I'm happy to, we didn't have anybody on the Republican side in the company. And so I've reached out to all the Republican campaigns, the legislators, anybody that wants to talk energy, that wants to understand what's going on, that needs data. I'm a resource. So it's been great. I've had a good run at it, and you get an opportunity to do stuff like this. So that's sort of the thumbnail.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think that gives a good snapshot of. So I think what I heard in there, just for fun, is that you're from away.
Yeah, I'm from a lot of away. If you've been there on vacation, I probably lived there. So,
yeah,
I've lived in Colorado and California and Florida and Arkansas and Germany and Maine and Rhode Island and Boston and Virginia and Florida. And I mean, God, it's crazy.
Wow. Yeah. I can only imagine. Outside of spending I spent 5 months in Kenya, primarily Kenya, last year. But outside before that, I had never spent more than 3.5 weeks consecutively outside the state of Maine. And so I've been to a lot of places, but living a lot of places is very different. Obviously, when you go and you visit a place, you get a sense of what it's like. And you always, I don't know, I think a lot of times you think it's much better than it is, or much worse than it is, in the short time that you're there. And if you actually spend more time, it levels out a bit one way or the other.
Well, I think it also shows you that it can be different, right? It doesn't have to be this way. Other people try different things. And I think I bring that perspective, and certainly working in economic development in Maine, and then for the Lobster Group, you kind of get a good view of how the rest of the world sees us, if they think of us at all. And that's been a good education as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into energy, I'm curious about both of these things. So with from your experience, maybe there's one from each, or just in general, working with both Maine and Company and with the lobster industry, what would you say are the biggest concerns, or the biggest factors that are inhibiting, outside of energy, right? But that are inhibiting businesses from growing. Yeah, because obviously energy is we could talk about 36% increase year over year, just the crazy amount. But what are the other factors that are inhibiting growth, economic growth in the state of Maine outside? Honestly, of energy?
I think it's our reluctance to think big, to do big things. 25 years ago, Portland, Maine, and Austin, Texas were about the same in terms of population and what was going on. Look at Austin today. They decided, and they have the bumper stickers, keep Austin weird, and it's a crazy place, and it's not conservative by any stretch. It's an island in the state of Texas, but man, they focused on economic growth and development. And yes, there's traffic, but they built freeways, and they created jobs, and they built houses, and just that notion of thinking big. We think that. It's one of my favorite topics in energy. Energy prices are too high, and what's the response from our government? Well, let's increase LIHEAP, the funding for underprivileged folks, to get them help to pay their oil bill. Well, why don't we do something about reducing the cost, right? I mean, it's the two different views of the world, and I think that notion that we don't think big and that we think we're stuck with what we have, probably, we were able to defeat a lot of that in the lobster business. I mean, when I first started with the lobstermen, they were skeptical, as you might imagine. We're going to do what? Marketing? We're going to do, stop it. And I said, well, the whole goal here is for you to catch one lobster and we'll sell it for $1 million. And they, yeah, right. I said, okay, how about if you catch two for $500,000? I didn't have to get to 5 before every lobsterman went, oh, I get it. Let's increase the value. And I don't have to work as hard. And I don't have to catch as many. And that's the notion, right? And so we went to cities around the country and talked to chefs and got in local media and told the story of Maine lobster, which people love, right? That's an How do they name their boats? Tell me about a lobster. We had lobstermen come with us to meet these guys, to talk in the local papers, and everywhere we went, and sales increased in those cities due to the coverage that we got. And we didn't have to buy it. We earned it, right? The newspapers love to cover that story. Lobstermen are a great sell. That's the kind of thing. We have these great stories and these great things that are appealing to lots of folks outside of Maine, but we sort of keep them to ourselves and we think, oh, we've got our problems and we can't solve them. And I think there's opportunity that we just have run by.
Yeah. Well, I think from my perspective, I think it's like where the opportunity is that like our government doesn't seem to want, like I think when Janet Mills got elected, you had that open for business sign that used to be when you came to Maine. Open for business used to be there, and I think she took it down, like, which blows my mind why you would even do that, or covered it up or whatever it was. Doesn't matter. It doesn't say that anymore. And like there clearly is not a desire to develop, and it's kind of they've got this like Marxist anti-capitalist ideology that we don't want businesses. We don't want to tell stories of businesses thriving and growing. We want to tell stories of the government thriving and growing. That seems that like if you actually look at what their message is, yeah.
Right. It's a mindset view. And so to me, if you go around the rest of the country, the Summit has operations in Oklahoma and Arkansas and Colorado, Missouri, and Maine. And so I kind of get to see, from that perspective, what's going on in the energy world. And it's a vastly different regulatory array. It's a vastly different political environment. It's just, we make it hard on ourselves here. It doesn't have to be this hard.
Absolutely. So when it comes to energy, there's like, I've had a number of conversations with a number of different people, and I feel like what every Mainer knows, right, is that prices are going up, right? We all know that it's more expensive. And I think our government recognizes that this is going to be potentially damaging to them in this next election. I think the Democrats recognize that. And I think that I just had some people, and I feel like they work for the Maine government, and they're trying to make sure that all Mainers are signed up for whatever so that they get their rebate. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about, somebody literally just stopped by my door today to be like, I want to just take a look at your bill and make sure you're getting the credit for the solar, because you started paying this like $15 a month a couple of years ago, and I want to make sure that you're actually getting your, and I was like, can you leave? I didn't even want to talk to him.
Some of those are just scams. We do have something called the Maine Energy Trust that administers our rebate programs for different agenda items. Now, traditionally around the country, and this is again where travel is helpful, there are efficiency programs that are administered by state government. In Maine, we have the Efficiency Maine Trust. And when I first came to Summit, they administered a rebate that we gave for efficiency in natural gas facilities. So efficiency in boilers and in stoves and dryers and all that. And a customer would get a credit for that. Over time, the Efficiency Maine Trust has abandoned natural gas and only gives rebates on heat pumps, solar arrays, EVs, that sort of thing. So so now, instead of having the government help me create more efficient customers, I now compete with the government for the same customers, which is appalling to me when I think about it. But that any business would have to compete with its government for doing something that's perfectly legal and in demand by a customer base. It's a phenomenon in Maine that I find, well, appalling is the right word. Anyway, so that's the my guess is a lot of these guys that are going door to door are the solar salesmen that are trying to make everybody feel better about what's happening, because they've taken just and rightly so, they've way overpromised. In Maine, solar panels work about 13% of the time. So today it snowed first time, they didn't work at all. And you can look at the ISO New England website and it'll tell you in real time what is powering our grid. And solar's given nothing. How many millions and billions of dollars have we put into solar in Maine and around New England to have it on the day when you need it the most? This is the coldest day of the year. It's snowing. Kids are home from school. You need it the most, and it produces nothing. That's a problem. And I think it's just a real poor public policy.
Yeah, no, I mean, wind and solar to me, like even before we get into like how I just don't think they make sense. Like I think when you look at in a place like wind, I don't think makes sense hardly anywhere. Um, just
Let
in
me tell
terms
you
of
why
how,
it doesn't make sense.
yeah, go
Okay,
for it.
for a minute. So what we're used to in developed countries, and states that have high functioning economies, we're used to affordable, reliable, and resilient energy. What does that mean? It means when I turn the light switch on, the light comes on, and when the bill comes at the end of the month, I can pay it. Right? That's sort of the litmus test. And that's got to be the foundation of any power system: affordable, reliable, and resilient. And the nature of solar and wind is intermittency. I don't know when the wind is going to blow, and I don't know when the sun is going to shine. I do know that it's dark every night. So the best a solar panel can be is 50% of the time it can work, right? Because at least half the time it's dark. In Maine, you had snow, you had clouds, you had rain, you had whatever, and it boils down to about 13% of the time. And so you have to install all of the transmission wires and gear to get to that solar farm. But yet, if I make all those wires go to a gas turbine or a nuclear power plant or a coal plant, I know it's going to work all the time. And so I get a return on that investment for 100%. Solar, I only get a return on that investment for 13% of the time, but I still got to build it as if I get full power from it all the time, because I don't know how to build half a wire. I don't know how to build 13% of the wire because I don't know when it comes. So it costs more for that infrastructure, and you don't get the return on it. And I've got to build something else for 87% of the time when that solar farm isn't working. So it hurts you twice. And it's the same with the wind. Wind in Maine works about 21 or 2% of the time. So it's only 88, or 80%. But the point is 78 or 80. But what the point is that I still have to build infrastructure for a full-time unit that only works 20% of the time. And I have to have something else to displace it when it's not working. So what we've done in New England is we've said, oh my gosh, solar and wind are going to be the panacea, and we're going to close coal, and we're going to close natural gas early, and we're going to close all the nuclear power plants. So we've done that. And so the remaining plants that are generating electricity have to work harder because we've taken off all of the insurance factories we had. And in the meantime, we're adding more demand, and we're adding intermittent generation that doesn't work on a day like today. So what does that mean? You got to run what you got even harder. So if you've got a car and you run it at 100 miles an hour, it'll do that for a while, and at some point it's going to break down. It'll last a lot longer if you can run it at 50 miles an hour, right? So what we've done is we've overstressed our existing generation capacity and added intermittency. And so that's why it costs more. And that's why it feels wrong. And the numbers are bearing it out. I mean, it's not just me talking. So.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's one of the things that as I was studying this, I was talking to another guy who is kind of an expert, at least it seems to me, an expert in how all this stuff works and learning more about it. And that, like, one of the biggest problems, as you said, right, is that because of the fact that these things are intermittent and we can't rely on them for base load always, again, they're not reliable, and we don't have batteries, right? We don't have battery. I think part of the idea is we'll get enough of them and we'll get them stored in these batteries, and then we'll be able to run.
Can we have that conversation for just a second?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you hear all the time about Germany, especially last year when after Ukraine, and we banned Russian gas via their pipeline, and we talk about that, it's all fiasco too. But the Germans stored gas. They stored LNG, right? You heard all about it. They have these salt caverns in Germany. The geography works. They stored about 80% of what they use in a month in the winter or something like that. That power that was stored in those caverns, the equivalent would have taken all the battery factories in the world 400 years to produce, right? So the amount of power stored in that gas, if you were going to put it in batteries, you'd have to use all the battery factories that are currently operating, making everything they can make for 400 years to give you that capacity as you had in those gas caverns. The point is we're not building batteries that are grid scale that can survive for more 4 or 5 minutes. They're not going to survive for 3 weeks of no wind or 2 weeks of snow. which is routine in New England. So that adds to the problem, but that's that fallacy. Oh, we'll put batteries, we'll store the power when in the daylight, when the solar panel is working. Okay, that's fine, but it still doesn't fix the 13% problem. It still doesn't fix the 20% problem that wind has. It's a talking point, but you can't possibly do it. It's the same with ocean wind. Ocean wind's my favorite. Maybe I should take a breath here, but ocean wind, that all the New England governors said that's going to be our thing. So nobody ever modeled it until ISO New England did about a year and a half ago now. And ISO New England determined that in order to make all of the ocean power that the New England governors had promised, you would have had to take a piece of the ocean the size of Connecticut, and all it would be is solar panels. And about a month after that report came out, a study from Scandinavia came out and said that, oh no, we've got to space ocean wind terminals further and further apart because the wake turbulence degrades the wind turbine behind it. So it's really two Connecticuts in the ocean, the size of Connecticut in the ocean. It's the wholesale industrialization of our oceans. Well, you can't get anybody to finance it now. Our government dropped out. Every major company in the world quit making ocean wind. And not only that, they couldn't make it because the subsidies weren't enough and they were stupid. And the power agreements were 3 and 4 and 5 times what people currently pay for electricity. So you had to pay that much more, and still that wasn't enough to finance these things. So the dirty little secret for Maine in particular is that we have this Maine won't wait plan, and it cannot work because you cannot generate ocean wind power. And nobody has told the emperor she's not wearing any clothes anymore because this plan won't work. So why are we still pursuing it when we know the numbers don't add up? And without ocean wind, it was never going to work anyway. But without ocean wind, it cannot work. So it's a problem, and it's something that we don't hear talked about enough or at all. But the current plan that the state of Maine is pursuing cannot work, just mathematically.
Well, and the frustrating thing, I think there's a couple things that I want to say, but like one is that like I think there's, like you said, they're still pursuing it despite. I think there's obviously that they're operating in the hope that the federal government will be under different leadership in the future, and that they'll be able to get money from the federal government. But it's just like it's a.
Can I tell you?
Yeah.
Go ahead. No. What
I was just going to say it's untenable. That's what the point is. Like it's not economically viable, and it's actually dangerous. I think environmentally as well.
Yeah,
they don't seem. They're supposedly doing this for environmental reasons, but it's dangerous anyway. To the
no, you're exactly right. I mean, we don't care about whales or fish or lobstermen or birds or any of that anymore. Yeah, that doesn't matter. There's a thing right now that they're pursuing. This is reported on in some papers outside of Maine. It's called the Heat Pump Compact. And it's all the New England states have banded together. And there's still $450 million from the IRA that was not corrected by the big, beautiful bill. And their goal, these 5 states, these 5 governors are going to try to install 580,000 more heat pumps in the next couple of years, and they're using that federal money to do it. And they're going to tell you how great this is. The problem is that they're adding demand to a fragile grid. And the more demand you add without the corresponding generation capacity, you make the grid more fragile. And that's what they're doing. And they're rushing headlong into it. And nobody's stopping to say, hey, wait a minute. How are you going to generate electricity for all these people? For all these heat pumps, where's that coming from? And real live power, so that when they turn on these heat pumps, they actually work. There's no discussion of it, and so what we are doing is sailing, full steam into blackouts and brownouts. I mean, it's going to get cold and dark if they do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, it's one of those things where like anybody who does any deal of research and looking into this and trying to understand it, like. I don't know how you come away with any other perspective than wind and solar are not really options right now. I don't know if they ever will be options, but they're not options right now, right? If that makes sense.
They don't work for a grid. They work for other things, but they're not ever going to be grid scale, reliable, affordable, and resilient. They're just not.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things I want to ask you about, but I want to talk a little bit about, like, as an example, what happened in Spain
Mhm.
earlier this year. I think that's a great example of one of the problems. But I think one of the things that you said before, I just want to kind of like maybe highlight or whatever. But basically, because of the fact that they're unreliable, right? We have to also pay for something else to be available in the event that we need it, and we
Okay.
will. And so basically, we're doubling our kind of our fixed cost, right? Because both of those organizations, the wind and the solar, and then all the other forms of generation that we need as backups, have a minimum base base cost before you even count in turning them on, right? And so we're basically doubling that cost before we've even generated any electricity. And then on top of that, right, from what I understand, we're also offering all these subsidies, government money that's being spent to like underwrite. And this is where our bills have like $15 a month to be able to pay for the expansion. So we're adding to our cost there, right? Am,
Mhm.
am I missing anything? Is there more here?
Yes, you're exactly right. But you're missing one thing that's very inside baseball, but is really important. Okay. So you're right. We are subsidizing we have socialized the cost to hook these solar fields up. We still have all the costs to maintain our current grid, but we're socializing the cost to do all this new stuff. But there's more. The federal government had decided that a solar farm could get 28 cents a kilowatt just for generating. That's all they got to do is they generate a kilowatt. The government gives them 28 cents. Not selling that electricity yet. They get 28 cents just for generation. So we have what's called auctions to see which generators are going to generate on the grid. And so the solar farm, looks and sees it's going to be sunny tomorrow, and they say, well, I got to get that. I can get 28 cents, which is a pretty good number for power. I'll bid zero so that I make sure they pick me. Well, the guy that's running the gas turbine says, can't do it for zero. Nuclear power guy says, can't do it for zero. And so solar gets picked. Well, that's great, except that when it's time to refinance or build a new gas peaker plant or a gas generation or a nuclear power plant, the bank says, well, wait a minute, when are you going to generate? Well, I don't know for sure because, well, these other guys get advantaged. I'm not going to invest in that because I can't get 100% usage. So I'll put my capital to work someplace else where I can get a full return on that investment. So what you've done is you've discouraged thermal generation. You're discouraging investment in thermal generation, and you're left with an unreliable intermittent system that's weather dependent. And so they've really, done it by the numbers and that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why the grid is so fragile, is that you are systematically taking away the stuff that actually works.
Well, right. So kind of part of what I'm hearing too is that people are not going to invest in what do we call them? Fossil fuel
Thermal generation.
where they're not going to invest in thermal generation companies because the government, specifically here in the state of Maine, is trying to ruin that business entirely. So who's going to invest in that? So you've got less and less people that are interested in generating that way, so that when you do need it, the people who are generating it at higher cost. But also, let's take the scenario where you said earlier, because of the fact that the solar, as long as they produce something, they automatically get 28 cents from the government that they take from us via taxes, and so they can generate it for us on our bill at zero to the power grid. But when it gets beyond their capacity, what happens?
Well,
right?
then
Either if they can't or somebody else is the one, we need more than what they can produce.
You pay a premium to have somebody spin up when they're not, on the schedule to do it. So you pay more for that power.
Right. So in every case, we're paying more for our power, period. Right. Like that's
exactly right.
It's this government scam that's been created. So one of the things that I think I'm curious about, because I think a lot of people don't understand, because I remember part of the reason that there was this huge push, and I think a lot of people were interested in getting rid of CMP, is because most Mainers, I think, operate under the assumption that CMP is the reason that the prices of energy goes up, it's not really. I mean, some of the cost obviously is related to CMP, but CMP actually doesn't generate any electricity. They just deliver electricity, right?
They can only charge what the PUC will allow them to charge. And oh, by the way, the PUC mandates what they must build and charge on. So it's been very clever by the government, because they mandate all these things that CMP must do, but they don't appear as taxes. They appear as your energy bill. So you blame the guy that sends you the bill, not the person that forced them to spend that money.
Right. Yeah. And so help me understand. You've mentioned the PUC before, and I don't think a lot of people really understand. Like, I had a number of conversations, and I feel like I'm still just beginning to grasp this. I mean, we can look at the basics and we can know that wind and solar are bad, and these subsidies are costing us money. And, from what we've talked about, they're causing the cost to rise. But what the heck is the PUC? How is it determined how much we're paying for energy prices? Like, what is that?
So the Public Utilities Commission is established, and it's in every state. I think you have to have it for some, there might be some federal mandate, but everybody's got to have a public. And what they're charged to do is make sure that the consumer doesn't get gouged. And so they approve every investment we make. Every utility has to go there, and every now and again you'll have a rate case, and you'll bring them, here's the investments I'd like to make, here's the return I need to get, and they let you build it, or they say, no, that's an imprudent investment, you may not.
How do we fire them?
Well, you got to take an act of the legislature. The current chairman of the Public Utility Commission in Maine, his last job was chairman of the Democratic Party. So, and in this last legislative session, they changed their mandate from not only protecting consumers, but also making our power renewable. And so that really is, they're two in conflict. Right, you can't do one and not do the other. So they've done that, right. But
it seems like it's like that idea that we can't have DEI and meritocracy. Right. It's a similar idea here. You can't be both fighting to make sure we get the best prices and fighting to ensure we have quote unquote renewables.
These weather-dependent intermittent weather-dependent generation facilities have advantage in the marketplace. So that's what they've done, to the point that in New York and in Massachusetts, the Public Utilities Commissions have denied any new natural gas capacity. Why is that important to us? We are at capacity in the winter on our peak days for natural gas in New England. Well, we're talking about electricity. Why does natural gas matter? Well, about 60% of all of our electricity in New England is generated from natural gas. So that works fine in the summertime. But when demand goes up, day like today, 20 degrees outside, snowing, we burn more gas to generate more electricity because demand goes up. Well, we're not able to get more gas through the pipes. Pipes have a capacity, just like your hose. I can only put so much in it. So rather than build more pipes, which there have been 3 proposed in the last 10 years that have all been shot down by New York and Massachusetts, we import LNG, liquefied natural gas, into Boston and New England, and it raises our rates in the wintertime about 35% for the fuel to make electricity. And so we do that. We're buying gas from Venezuela, from Trinidad and Tobago. Up till a few years ago, we were buying it from Russia. And why do we do that? When I'm in North Yarmouth, so I'm 350 miles away from the cheapest, most prolific natural gas fields in the world in Pennsylvania, and we can't run a pipe from Pennsylvania to New England. Instead, we're running ships from Venezuela, and at 10, 20, 30, 40 times the cost. And so when you want to know why your electricity bill goes up in the winter, there's 2 charges. There's distribution charges, and that's basically CMP, transmission and distribution. And then there's the fuel, the electricity itself, and that's basically the fuel to generate and some fee for the generator so he can invest or she can invest in their equipment. And so those are the two pieces of your bill. we talked about the transmission. That's mandated social, the solar and wind and all of that. And then on top of it, we've restricted the amount of natural gas we can get from Pennsylvania, but yet we're increasing the demand by adding EVs and heat pumps, and we're restricting the capacity of our natural gas. So we have to buy more expensive natural gas from the world market. If you were setting out to make the dumbest system on the planet, you couldn't have done better than what we've done.
Well, there's so many things like this. I'm glad that you said it that way, because like I have these conversations, and like the question is either the Democrats are corrupt or stupid, right? Either they're just inept beyond belief, or they're corrupt. And one of the things that makes me feel like it's corrupt is that this type of stuff, exactly what you just said, if you're trying to create like the dumbest way to do it, this is it, right? Like there's so many cases where that tends to play out to be true, like where it's like, if you're trying to tank the system and destroy the system, this is the way to do it. And if they're inept, they tend to align themselves pretty closely with how, again, leading me to believe that corruption is like they're intentionally trying to destroy the system.
I can't disagree with you, but there might be a third option, and that is that
I would love a third option.
The people in power are ideologically pure, and they absolutely believe that we need to get rid of natural gas and gasoline and any fossil fuel, and so they're doing everything they can to eventuate that outcome. I think it's. And then I think they pay their friends to run wind farms. So I think it's probably a little of 2 and 3. But I think it's an ideological battle that fossil fuel bad, carbon bad. That's where we are.
I think you're right. I think when it comes to this issue, there are other issues where I could make some other arguments. But I think when it comes to this issue, you do have a lot of people that are ideologically, I would say captured with this idea that if we don't stop using natural gas immediately, we're not going to have a future. The planet's gonna raise and all that other kind of stuff. The temperature.
I've had these debates, Chuck, with a couple of folks, town meetings and stuff about this, and they cite these doomsday scenarios. But when you go to the IPCC, which is the UN body that is focused on climate change, none of them are predicting these kind of calamities that you see from the press and you see from Democrats. And it's their inconvenient truth is that even the IPCC is not talking about the kind of catastrophes that they are. And so we've ginned up this scare machine, and that's what we've got. Well, the good news is none of the doomsday predictions have come true. Al Gore for 30 years has been talking about the ice cap melting, and it hasn't happened yet. This year is the first year in 20 where a hurricane did not make landfall in the United States, this last hurricane season of 25. So the doomsday, at some point, Chicken Little, it starts to happen, right? And I think you're seeing that in the communities. A, I'm not seeing this calamity, and B, I've got energy bills I can't pay. Maybe there's another way. And hopefully that's the opportunity for sanity to get back into the picture.
Well, it would be great. I would love sanity. I would love, affordability to be a thing here in the state of Maine, because there are other areas. So obviously, let's go back to, now that we're talking about energy, let's go back to business investment in the state. So you've talked about the fact that, oh gosh, my brain shut off. But the cost of, wow. Anyway, go business investment in the state. One of the biggest hindrances to business investment in the state is energy. Oh, and this is what I was going to say. You talked about the fact that they're obviously pushing all these EV mandates, right? They want to push EV mandates. They want to. I don't know, they haven't done this yet, but there's conversation in some states. I think they've proposed the idea of banning people from being able to have gas-powered stoves, in their houses.
Yeah, we pretty much beat that back. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're pushing heat pumps, right? Which all these things are going to lead to more energy, more electricity being used. But also this type of thing impacts businesses being able to invest in Maine, right? If you want to bring a business to Maine, energy costs are an impact. So like, is that like when you were working for that organization, and for whatever reason it's
Maine and Company.
It's a Maine and Company. Like what do you see as, like, how does that impact businesses deciding whether or not they're going to come to Maine? I guess
it's determinative.
Get the question out. Yeah.
No, it's determinative. It's not a nice to have. It's not we are 80% higher than the national average for electricity in Maine. We are 120% higher than an average of the bottom 10 states. So if you're an energy user, say a data center, and power is a big part of your cost structure, why are you going to go a place that's twice the national average or 80% more than the national average? Why wouldn't you go to a place that is half of what Maine is? And there are 10 states where their power costs are half of ours. It's simple math. So you cannot attract businesses here that use electricity. Well, I don't know any that don't. And what's worse is you're having a difficult time maintaining the businesses you do have, right? Because they can go somewhere else, or their business can go someplace else because somebody else can cut them out of the market because they can charge less because their cost basis is less. So it is a critical piece to economic development, is to have competitive energy costs. I don't need to be number one, but I can't be 50. And we're getting close to 50 now, and the disparity is so much that we don't even get on the list for a lot of these site location exercises because power is just way too expensive.
Right. And if we can't, and I think the important thing to consider is, like, obviously so many people growing up in Maine, raising their kids in Maine, they want their kids to be able to live in Maine. It's been a problem, right, that we've had since I was a kid. They talked about this. But
this is 25 or 30 years of really bad policy. So when I first came to Maine to run the St. Lawrence and Atlantic in 1995, yes, I'm old. There were 23 paper mills in Maine. And that for me was, that was mother's milk. I mean, we go to those paper mills and try to get their paper and get their inbound chemicals. And, we're competing with the other railroads and trucks. And it was great. And today there are 3 paper mills in Maine. So what does that do to you? Well, one, there's an obvious job. People, kids in Millinocket used to get out of high school and walk across the street and go to work for the mill, just like their uncle or their brother or their dad did, or their sister or their mother. And that opportunity is gone because that mill is gone. What's worse for folks that didn't live in Millinocket, people like you and me, is 23 large industrial users were paying part of our transmission and distribution charges. Right, that grid is still there, but you had Rumford and Jay and Madison and all these paper mills that were paying into the system. Well, they're gone now. So that cost didn't go away, just those payers did. And so what happens? Well, residential and small commercial pick up the slack. And that's another reason why you're seeing this upward pressure in our energy costs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the more
it's an exercise in deindustrialization. It's the same experiment Germany is running, right? As you make your power costs higher, your industry leaves. The latest one was Dragon Cement that left 2 years ago. We tried to bring natural gas to them. They were currently burning petroleum coke, carpet, and old tires. That was their permit. And we were gonna bring natural gas and lower their carbon footprint, something like 80%. And the town of Rockland shouted us down. They couldn't make us stop, but we don't want to go where we're not wanted. So we backed away from the project. We were going to build it. And about 6 months later, Dragon Cement announced they were leaving. And in their announcement cited the fact that they couldn't get natural gas and they had to leave. So we continue to deindustrialize. And I'd be interested to go ask the folks in Thomaston how their property tax bills are going up because they don't have the biggest payer in town anymore. It's those kinds of impacts that we don't think about when we think about energy, but it really goes to the heart of affordability in Maine. And we're really at a tipping point. We've made all these bad decisions. I think if we get the right governor and if we get the right policy enacted, it's a 10-year problem. If we don't, I think we fall off the cliff. I think it's that guy. Yeah, I really do.
No,
and there's rockets above. We're not going to live.
I think there's a real serious concern, and like what's interesting is like people are always saying this is the most important election, this is the most important election, this is the most important election.
I thought the one I ran in was, but it wasn't.
And so like you don't want to sound like too crazy and just keep saying the same thing. And again, kind of like the chicken little the sky is falling, and eventually people aren't going to believe you. Or the kid who cried wolf, he did it too many times, and eventually nobody believed him. Unfortunately, the wolf is here, and I think that's kind of where we're at this point, right? Like I think there is like we have an opportunity. We're going to go one of two directions. One, we're not going to die, right? I mean, Maine's not going to disappear, but like a lot of people are going to be forced to leave.
It could be Jamaica.
Right. Yeah.
With a lot of wealth concentrated in tourist areas, and then a lot of poverty outside of them. We can certainly do that.
Yeah. And so I think that's that's the point, is like, if we don't make the right decision in 2026, I mean, when you elect a governor, like, generally speaking, they're going to be in office for 8 years. This is what's happened in Maine, right? We've had governor, I don't know how far you'd have to go back to find that you get 2-term governors, just what tends to happen here. And, for the last 40 something years, the Democrats have controlled the majority of the legislature, we've had a couple blips, during the 4 years. Yeah, that's right. But for the most part, the Democrats and like through the course of COVID, since COVID, I think we were trending this way anyway. We've had a lot of out-of-staters from Democrat areas come to Maine and shift the demographics more Democrat. And so the logical probability is that as things get more expensive, people will continue to sell stuff in other places and come to Maine. These wealthier people come to Maine and retire and continue to shift us more blue. Unless something. So like, again, if we don't win in 2026, I think it becomes very, very challenging in for the next 10 years, right? 8 years, whatever it is, to be able to make any meaningful positive change. And who knows, like when states make that move of becoming too blue, it becomes hard to ever come back. From. That's kind of the concern that a lot of us have here in the state of Maine. So I think it's worth noting, this is not like fear mongering or anything like that. It's just a reality of like the outworking of these policies. And if you can't have business investment, and I think you talked about data centers before, because that's like one of that would have been, if we had a reasonable grid, a really great opportunity to bring investment in Maine, right? Unfortunately, we've priced ourselves out, and you can't fix energy generation overnight. And so one of the things, so let's talk solutions though, because like I think like yes, Can
we talk one more? Because you bring up a great point. And we're linked in lockstep with the other New England states, right? We talk about Massachusetts, New Hampshire. The problem is those economies, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, have a knowledge-based economy. There's a lot of biotech. There's Harvard. There's MIT. There's Yale. And so the research and the companies that come out of that, the biotech in Cambridge and all of that, and all these sundry industries that build up around it, finance comes with it, are not as sensitive to energy prices as Maine is with our more blue collar. And so, and if you look at average incomes, that really shows you I think it's 82,000 and 47,000, something like that in Maine, 82,000 in the rest of New England. Like we're way below. And the point is our economy has grown up on these industries that have now left us. And so to say that we can just be like Massachusetts, well, we don't have their infrastructure. We don't have Harvard here. I mean, hats off to Maine. It ain't Harvard. And we're not generating the kind of research and entrepreneurial activity. We don't support it with graduate school, opportunities here. And so we don't have, we are not as resilient when it comes to these energy prices. So that's part of the issue.
Yeah, that's a really important factor to consider. Like, I mean, California, for instance, as well. They've got like all these huge tech companies and all this industry. We don't have that, and so like, most of Maine, like we're not in an environment where we're going to be able to handle this huge loss. We also like we're not an ideal destination, for instance, for businesses to come because they can get cheap labor. Right? Like, let's say we were that place where it's like, okay, well, maybe there are these other things that are not ideal, but at least we can get cheap labor. Like, no,
is that really where we want to compete? Is that the place you want? Is that the place you want your kid to compete? I don't. I want my kids to compete.
I don't want to compete there, but I want to compete somewhere. I want somebody to want to invest in Maine. Yeah. That's what I agree. But the point is, like, even if that was a consideration, it's not in Maine because of our minimum wage laws that have made it, like, even out in the county.
I'll tell you an anecdote. When I was at Maine and Company, we were interviewing a call center guy, and we brought him up to one of the major towns in Maine, and he was asking, he was a site location consultant. He was asking, well, what other things are coming? And the town thought that this was a Chamber of Commerce opportunity. So they told him about the mall that was going to be built and all these new businesses that were coming. And the guy packed up his notebook and walked out in the parking lot. He says, I can't compete with that. That's just too much. I need to go to a place where they're going to want these jobs, right? And so, and then he said, and I also looked at your welfare, and this is a long time ago now. This is 2005. He says, I can't compete with your welfare. It's too lucrative. I can't, my starting salary is about where your welfare starts. And I can't get people to come work for me if I got to compete with the government, because that's going to do nothing but go up, and probably at a quicker rate than I can afford to pay him more. And so he went someplace else. That's the problem we have, right? I mean, it's too expensive to operate here. There's not enough jobs to go around, and our welfare is so attractive that it's hard to get people to work at entry level jobs.
Which is a really great point. It doesn't get an energy, but no, I mean, this is the problem that we have here in the state, is like our welfare is too good to be able to get people to work.
At entry level.
But at entry, well, and that's where you have to start. That's the problem. And this is, we sometimes talk about this cliff situation.
I worked at McDonald's. I started there.
Yeah. I started working in banking as a part-time teller, right? Like, this is how I started.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to start someplace.
Well, we're going back that far, shoveling snow for the local store. Anyway, but like, yeah, I mean, you have to start off at the beginning, and when you're there, you're not making enough to make up for the benefits that you get on state benefits, right? This is the problem, and there's just this cliff that you go over, and I've shared this story before. I had an employee who was a single mom, and she was working, and she was a 30-hour employee. And I was like, okay, well, I'll find any opportunity I can, because I know that you could use the additional income to get you more work. And then she ended up coming in and basically being like, you need to limit me to only 30 hours. Otherwise, I'm going to lose $500 a month in benefits for, like, insurance for my son. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Okay, we'll cut you back down to 30. But like, that thing is like, so you're in this position where in order for her to be able to escape, right, she needs to find a way to basically go overnight from making $25,000 a year to $45,000 a year. When you look at all the benefits, that at the time, that was living at the same level. That's not even advancing. That's living at the same level and dealing with all kinds of additional stress. And like, but you can't go from here to there, right? There's a process along the way. And so we hamper people and keep people stuck on that. And that's one of the reasons we need to reform our welfare here in the state of Maine, is because we actually shouldn't want people to be stuck, and that's what we're doing to them, to be stuck on the system. We should want people to want to get off the system, because it's in their best interest. We are the Republican Party. It needs to brand itself. This is one of the things that we are. We're the party of empowerment. We actually believe in people. We think that there's a better life for them, and that's a life where they're not dependent on the government, and that we can help them get there by getting the government out of the way. And that will also create more business opportunity, because businesses will want to come here, right? They'll want to hire people. There'll be people to hire, all this other stuff. And that will create
a lot of really good downstream effects. That's right.
Absolutely. So, but okay, as far as energy goes, now obviously you work for Summit Natural Gas, and so you want your solutions. And I'm not saying that you're compromised by that, but I am saying that, like, you know, obviously part of the solution is probably going to be natural gas. But what are the solutions? What are the things that, if we had, like, whether they're Democrats or Republican, anybody who's willing to listen to make wise decisions about improving our energy grid so that we can grow our economy, create more opportunities for people to stay in Maine and live good lives in Maine. Like, what can we do to fix the problem? We've talked about, like, how we got here and what the problem is, but, like, what's the solution?
So I think first off, we haven't talked about Spain yet either, so we'll go back and get that later.
Well, we can do that. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
So the first thing is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. Right? That we've all heard that. So we need to stop digging. So that means let's end all these solar, wind, all of the subsidy and the net energy billing and all of that stuff. So they won't build any more of this stuff. We're stuck with it. They get the deal. I can't blame them for taking the deal. And they get the deal for 10 years. They get these tax exemptions and they get these subsidies. But let's not have any more, right? Let's stop digging. So I think if you did that, that would have an impact right away, because you take all that net energy billing stuff off your bill. You take all any new transmission distribution lines that you have to build to these silly things. So you stop that right away. So that's some relief. The second thing we ought to do, I think, is how do we get access to more natural gas? And not just for my company. I mean, yes, I distribute natural gas, but 60% of our electricity is natural gas, and we've constrained it.
Yeah.
So how do we get more natural gas into New England? How do we get more natural gas into Maine to generate electricity here? One of the ways to do that is build another pipeline. There are 3 privately funded companies that want to do this. They just need to get regulatory approval through New York and Massachusetts. My suspicion is there's a restraint of trade argument to be made in federal court. And with this administration, that might be joined by the Department of Energy and maybe even the Department of Justice. So that could be an interesting avenue. If nothing else, it would put pressure on those other 2 states to maybe rethink their positions. The third thing I would think about doing is creating storage facilities in Maine. Natural gas goes up over the winter. We're $3 in the summer, broad numbers. We're 10 or 12 in the winter. So not buy a bunch of $3 gas, and maybe we can sell it in the winter at $6 to pay for the facility over time, right? But you're still selling gas for much cheaper than we're currently paying in the wintertime to smooth out that demand curve. But you can't even get a storage facility built now. So to me, I would do that. That's probably a midterm kind of 2 or 3 year program to get that done. Maybe get FAME to finance it. Or help do that and encourage more natural gas here. I'd also encourage gas generation with the same sort of facility. If we could get more cheap gas here, let's put up some gas turbines to generate some more electricity locally. That will lower the cost to users. And the third thing I do, I think, is look real hard at small modular nuclear reactors. They're small now. They're homogenized. They're safe. The U.S. Navy essentially has been using small modular nuclear reactors since 1954 to run, our fleet without incident. So I think the opportunity is there for us to get nuclear here. We could put it in places where there used to be a paper mill because they have big transmission lines you have to build them, or where there used to be a nuclear power plant. But that could happen. That's probably a 10 or 15 year deal. But again, that adds more supply to the grid. Without a big investment in transmission, and more supply equals lower price. So those are the 3 areas that I would work on.
Yeah, basic economics, right? More supply, but the same amount of demand leads to lower prices. And we're heading into an environment where we're reducing supply and increasing demand, which means it's going to get worse if we don't.
It's going to get worse. It is that might be a good way to end. It's going to get worse, and it's going to get worse faster if we don't do something.
So speaking of worse, do you want to talk about what happened? And I think some people heard about this. We have a guy who's involved locally who's originally from Spain, he was telling me at one point, this is how I learned about kind of what happened around, the clean, we'll call clean energy crisis that happened over in Europe. Because power was out completely in Spain and he couldn't get in touch with his family, and he was concerned about what was going on. So that's how I learned about it. But I'm assuming you're much more familiar and you can kind of explain what happened and how that's related to the same type of bad policies that we're trying to push here.
Yeah. It's Spain and Portugal that lost power for 38 hours, I think. And so they had about 80% of their generation was solar that day. And what happened was a cloud went over the solar farm, and that changed the frequency ever so slightly, ever so quickly. It changed the frequency. Well, all of these machines, the frequency, that's another thing people don't understand about the grid, the horrible complexity. But the frequency of the power has to match, and it didn't. And so it took that solar farm off the grid, even for just a split second. It just shut itself down automatically. So it broke the connection. That sent another surge through the system. So every other solar farm in Spain tripped off as well. And the difference with a natural gas facility is you have a big spinning wheel. And so those voltage changes just don't happen because they have something called inertia. It just keeps spinning. So the voltage stays within very narrow band limit. So even if there is a hiccup, it's very narrow, and so you don't trip off the whole grid. Well, they tripped off the whole grid and had a cold restart, which took 36 hours. So as I said, essentially a cloud went over, tripped off all the solar farms, and that was that. It wasn't bad weather. It wasn't sabotage. It was just physics.
Which is just crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we're signing up for here. So we could talk longer and more. I'm
sure.
running up against a hard stop, but the point is that we have done made some really bad policy choices, and we have an opportunity to fix them. But if we don't, it gets harder and harder to recover the longer we wait.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think when it comes to when it comes to the Democrat Party, like nobody over there seems to care at all about this. Their answer is going to be, just we got to push harder for it. Like they're probably going to say something silly along the lines of, if we get more innovation in clean, quote unquote, clean energy, which they don't include nuclear, and they also don't include hydro for some reason, and they're trying to do some things that are going to put SAPI out of business, is my understanding, because they're going to be closing down a bunch of hydro, some dams, I think, is that, if I'm not mistaken, and they're ideological on this, and so even if it ruins life for people in the here and now, they're going to believe that it's worth it for the sake of, quote unquote, saving our planet.
That's right.
Despite I think the reality that it's the situation that they're presenting is not. I'm not saying there aren't environmental concerns, but I just think that their solutions are not real solutions, and that the stuff that hydro, nuclear, and natural gas are not nearly as bad as they seem to think they are. I think that we need to think about what's going to lead to the most human flourishing here in the state of Maine, and that means we have to have different solutions. So we have to get out.
We have to have abundant power for human flourishing. There's just no other. There's no other way around.
Yeah, and so I'm going to say we need to vote. We need to vote for Republicans, because
I don't disagree. But if we're not asking these questions, if voters aren't educated and aren't asking these questions, it won't get better. So, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on at some point in the future. And
happy to do it.
Yeah. All right.
You know how to find me. Well, all right.